It's basically the talk. Yeah. But yeah, no, we kicked off about 8 months ago and rolled out of Cerebral Fix. So, I guess we have this false sense of security that we know what we're doing or something. And yeah, it was all about, okay, how we, basically what's the strategy for trying to make a ROI positive game, which is what I'll be taking you through today. And I think we're good. Feeling good. Yeah, it's the end of the day. You guys have done well to get here. So let's go. So Pomarie, I'm Nadia, and I'm one of the founders of Black Salt Games. Previously general manager of Cerebral Fix for 4 years, and a producer for 6 months before that. I guess my first job in the game industry was in 2005 when I started working at a gaming cafe. And that gave me a much wider appreciation for what it was about games that engaged and excited players beyond my own experience. I started in 2011 as a producer, and over the next 10 years, I would be part of delivering dozens of projects and game-adjacent projects, and have worked with all sorts of teams. So from tiny internal teams of 3 to massive teams spread all around the world and different time zones. That kind of sampling size gives you the opportunity to start identifying patterns, both in what works well for development teams as well as the product. So at the start of this year, myself and 2 veteran C-fixers decided to put what we had learnt over the years and our theories on how to be successful to the test. And today I'm going to be taking you through the exact process that we are using for our in-development game Dredge to try and set up Black Salt Games as a world-leading indie studio. So, small goals. So we're basically looking at min-maxing indie game development with an eye to make enough of a return to fund our next development project. If you're setting out just to make a game because you enjoy it and you want to learn about the process, then this strategy might not be a particular consideration for you yet. But if you are looking to make a positive return on investment, enough to fund further development or your next game project, then taking these things I'm about to tell you about into consideration is worth it. I'll tell you why I think they're important and what we at Black Salt Games are doing to try and address it. So, for a successful release of a title, you're kind of planning in 3 main areas: the product design, the product development, and the product marketing. Not doing a good enough job in any of these 3 areas is going to make it likely that your game doesn't return a profit. Now, you might be planning on signing with a publisher to handle the majority of the marketing stuff, and that's a fantastic idea. But you still need to generate enough interest in your game to get those publishers interested in looking at you in the first place. And we'll get into that a bit more later. So, design, development, marketing. We've got a project or a product management mantra going on, so let's roll with that and get into some data. So, we're mainly going to be talking about Steam today because unfortunately that's just where you can get the most data. Everything else is often a closed system. So the first hard fact is 80% of indie games released on Steam will earn less than $50,000. The next 10%, or 9%, will earn between $50,000 and $200,000. And then you've got the remainder that will actually earn over $200,000. 1% will earn $7 million, so you can shoot for that. Everyone obviously has different costs involved with their project, and making multiple games that earn $50,000 or less is absolutely a viable strategy. But for ourselves, we're aiming for that 90th percentile of earning over $200,000. There's something like 30 games a day being released on Steam, and with already 30,000 games already released. Now, consoles are less saturated, but you'll have more upfront costs, like having to outlay for dev kits, and then you need to get through lot checks to even find out if you have a place on the platform. So it's hard to juggle. Second fact, your year one Steam sales will likely fall into 12 to 20 times your day one sales. So good or bad, you're probably going to have a good sense of how your release, how your game is going pretty early on in the Steam release. Let's look at that equation a bit more. So if we have a game that we're selling at an average of $19.99 and we sell 100 copies, we could probably, 100 copies on day one, we can probably expect about 30 grand in that first year. If we're selling that same game and we happen to sell 1,000 copies on day one, then we're looking more at 300 grand, which is probably more what we're targeting. There are a few more nuances and differences in that. Obviously, you've got your pricing, how well your game gets reviewed, and everything. But and that's going to impact both your sales and how much you'll be promoted by Steam. And using this as a model obviously doesn't take into account any money you'd make from other platforms that you're releasing your game on. But it's just one of the tools that we're going to use to weigh up whether a game might be worth our time, investing our time and money into, or whether there might be a better option. So let's get into actually picking the right game to greenlight for a positive return on investment. So pushing the data aside for just a second, we will get back to it. We're all in this industry to provide experiences of value and to delight others. We want to tell stories and elicit new ways of seeing the world and inspire emotional connections. So crunching the numbers and attacking the niche has pretty limited application in this industry, I feel. It's the creativity, the design that is both familiar and set apart from games that have come before. Those are the types of experiences that developers want to make and gamers want to play. Now, I don't know any creative, and some people that specifically would say they're not creative, that doesn't have like this magnum opus in the back of their mind. The world, the experience, the story that they want to share with people. You've probably been kind of turning it over for months, if not years, in the back of your head, and it's going to be epic, right? Don't make that game yet. Wait until you have the manpower and the resources to do that one justice. But you do have also so many other awesome game ideas in your head. And when you share them with your team and hear their ideas as well, those games are going to become even more exciting. So the first stage of first step of game crafting here is brainstorming. Any and all story ideas, any and all game mechanics are on the table. So the target is at least 50 game ideas to come up with, but 20 minimum. So if you haven't by now discussed what kind of games you enjoy and the types of games you'd want to make within your team, and probably more importantly, the types of games you really don't want to touch at all, then do it at this point. Genres of games, monetization strategies, platforms, discuss and decide. If you're a one-person band, then whakamihi, this should be a whole lot easier for you. At least I hope it should be. But to facilitate this, before you go into the meeting, write up a bunch of prompt cards that you can use to discuss with the team. So how do people feel about free to play? How do people feel about VR? And make sure that you're figuring out what you're all aligning on. So back to these 100 game ideas. They should be 1 pages and basically just outline the core of the idea. Remember that we're going to throw the majorities of these away, so we don't want to author a massive GDD or anything. We just want to capture the essence. Then we're going to go through those 150 ideas as a team. We're going to talk through each of them, and some will probably evolve as we go through those few sentences about them. Some will also, that you really like, will fall flat with the rest of your team. That's okay. Like, just move on for now, throw them away, because you've got dozens of games to choose from. Now, you're also going to want to talk about just the big time chunks involved with each of the games, just to get a kind of handle on what might be involved. So, for example, if it's a multiplayer game, do you have are you going to be able to get the people in to play test and balance it right? If there's a big AI component with the game idea that's going to be needed, do you have the experience to program it? There might be some limitations that just means some of these ideas are off the table for now. That's good. Throw them out. Has someone already done it better than you could right now? Could you do it? But it's going to take years for you to do it, and you want to move faster. Throw it out. Now, the ones that are out of the scope of your team, just discard them for now. Because your circumstances will change, and you can come back in the future and revisit them. But this whole process is about giving us a chance at having those shots in the future. So, congratulations. The ones you didn't throw out is your prototype shortlist. Now, the more prototypes you do, the better your chances of landing on an idea that's going to develop into a successful game. Before landing on Dredge, we were a part of about 20 prototypes, most of them through Cerebral Fix and some that we did ourselves. But at the absolute minimum, create 5 prototypes. And when you kind of approach them with the idea not of which one am I going to pick out of these 5, but will any of these 5 be good enough to pick? Because that's what publishers are going to do when they review your game, and that's what players are going to do as well, because they have the options available. Now, into scoping out your prototypes. Remember, we've got quite a handful or more prototypes to do, so we actually don't want to take too long in building each of them. We need to figure out what is the minimum we can put together to test if a game loop is actually fun. So we're not trying to make 5 really fun prototypes here. We're actually hoping that the prototypes are going to show that the idea isn't fun after all. Or, it's fun for 10 minutes and then gets really boring really quick. So you don't want to spend too long building your prototypes, because you want to spend that time putting it into the actual game you choose to take into production. We decided we didn't want to spend more than 2 weeks. Anything less is also great, but again, have that discussion and try and create a time box around your prototypes that will allow you not to add too much into them. Now, estimating is one of those things that gets a whole lot easier once you've had a lot of experience at it. And even then, it's a dark art. So I do appreciate this is all easier said than done. But in terms of your prototype time box that you've set, just make sure you've set up review points, say every 5 hours or 10 hours that you've spent on the prototype, and work out if you're 5, 10, 20% of the way through. If you figure out it's actually going to take something like 3 months to build this prototype, then maybe reassess it, because think about how long the actual game is going to take at that point. So prototype code should be just enough to get by. Okay, so it's okay if you do things in a janky or unoptimized way, or it's missing things like tooltips that you can just tell your playtesters about, because you will be throwing this code out even if you do take that game into production, right? Right, guys? Playtesting. This is a massive part of our kind of development cycle. So it's good to get started early. Now, I know you have a great game. It's just that sometimes our great ideas don't translate into brilliantly fun games. And the only way we're going to know that is if we get other people to play our games and then tell us honestly whether they, enjoy it or not. Playtesting will also give you potential future ideas that you can incorporate into your game. And importantly, if you've picked the right playtesters, they'll be able to tell you if there is any other games out there similar to the one that you're looking at that you might have missed. And you're going to need that for the next part I'll be talking about. Now, there are a lot of great talks on how to conduct good playtests, so I'm not going to go through that here, but go watch them and just go at it. In our playtests, we ask our testers to think aloud as they're playing the game, and then we have a questionnaire at the end with questions that are common across all prototypes that we can ask them. One of the questions that we ask is if we were, if we had to remove one feature or something from the prototype, what should it be? And then that way we're learning if we're over-scoping those mini projects. So again, with each of your prototypes, test with a minimum of 5 playtesters, and broadly from the genre that you think is going to be interested in the game if you were to release it. Once you've tested all of your games with people from outside of your team, then you've got a bunch of data to go on, and you're going to use that along with this next part to determine if any of the prototypes are going to be worth taking or being your next commercial project. So, proper market analysis in this industry is really hard. There is not a whole lot of data to go on. So I'm probably filling you with all sorts of confidence here. Let me just brush over that and get into it. Super broadly, casual games is the worst genre in terms of revenue expectation on Steam, while role-playing games, strategy, and simulation games are the highest earning genres for indie games. You can imagine there the effort is a bit different in those categories as well. And also consoles do skew in a slightly different direction as well. With your market analysis, start looking at the games that your playtesters mentioned, the ones that you thought of earlier as well, and then jump on Steam and look up tags and keywords that you might use for your game. And for example, in terms of Dredge, we looked at games with day and night cycles, with insanity mechanics. And so you'll come up with a bunch of games that are superficially similar to yours. But that's okay, because that's still what the consumers are going to actually compare your game with. And those are the games that are going to be competing for audiences' attention. So, if you find a game that is exactly like your game, you should really try and learn as much about it as possible, unless it's clearly better than what you could hope to execute right now, in which case you maybe shelf that prototype for now and concentrate on some of the other game ideas. Again, for now, you can return and revisit it in the future. So ways to find information about these other games. Search for postmortems on GDC, YouTube, Gamma Sutra. You can find out how many developers were on the team, how long it took them to make. Sometimes they'll just flat out tell you how much it cost to develop and how much they sold as well. You can estimate how much the game's made really roughly by using the number of reviews times 30 to 70 times the price. The reviews are a gold mine of information, and you should spend a lot of time looking through them, especially from players that have spent, say, more than 10 hours in the game, if the game allows for that. And you're going to want to look at what that game did well, and really importantly, what the players didn't like about the game. So what frustrated the players. This will tell you what the players in your target genre are after, and hopefully you can analyze the good and the bad against your game and see where you're going to set yourself apart. Look at how long to complete and find out how many hours of content is in the game, and then do a rough price kind of value calculation of how many hours per dollar that game has. Again, just to give you a sense of what's going on. One thing to think about this at this point is saturated categories and niche markets. So what do you do when you find a lot of your type of game out there already? And what do you do if you find no one has a game out there like yours? Now, either one isn't necessarily an ill omen or a reason to forget everything else and go and attack that gap. Looking through the top sellers on any platform will tell you where the majority of players are spending their money, and your game might just fit into one of those categories that has a large amount of players always looking for something new. A niche market is a really exciting prospect because you'll really be able to market on your unique selling point. But just be careful, because without frames of reference, players might not be able to gauge whether your game is something that they're going to enjoy, and might pass it by for a more sure game. Not to mention that by the time you actually release your completely unique game idea, some other studio might have come along and had the exact same unique idea. So I appreciate I've got no answers for you at this stage. All I'm saying is, you're going to be weighing up a lot of variables, but it is an important exercise to go through to try and understand your place in the market. Now, the team needs to digest all this market information because we're about to go into scoping out what the bigger project might look like. Really high level scoping of how the final greenlit production project might look like. So easy comparison here is to use a whiteboard. At this point, we're not necessarily looking at the items that are common across all your games. So all your games are probably going to need some localization, saving and loading, that sort of thing. Where the point isn't to be meticulous and try and capture everything at this stage. We're really just trying to get a sense of the order of magnitude of each of the games compared to each other. So once you've mapped out just the high level features, things like multiplayer, AI, level design, how many 3D characters, how many animations, kind of thing. We're then going to assign them some t-shirt sizes. So, having a look at the work that's in front of you, identify the post-its that are smaller pieces of work. The ones that are bigger than those pieces of work become medium. If it's bigger than that, it's large. And you see how we kind of go. You can assign sort of time estimates as well to them. So a small might take a day, a medium might take 3 days, and a large a week, and kind of so on. From this, like if you use the time estimations, the really, really rough time estimations, then you're going to have a really, really rough idea of the size of your game. But it is an idea. Now, the production budget. So we're living in two worlds. We're aiming to get a publisher on board to maximize our game's potential reach, but we're also planning for the situation that we won't sign a publisher and what that means for the project. We're going to make a rough calculation of the number of units that we need to sell to reach our return on investment targets. So for this, you do need to think a little bit about the price point of your game. Hopefully your market research has helped inform that a bit. And we will kind of refine this budget a bit more down the line. So we'll just use our market data for the pricing for now. What we need to do is plug in the length of time needed that we just got from making our scope, the types of people, so, you know, are you going to need programming, art, design? How long are you going to need those people for? How much do those people cost? Factor that in. And you've also got things like dev kits, perhaps, definitely development licenses. Work that into your budget. And I've put platform fees here. It's not really plus platform fees. It's take into consideration platform fees at this point. Because if you're looking to, say, build a mobile game, that's going to have a different kind of return to you than, say, releasing on Steam or PlayStation, the stores with the higher 30%. As long as you opt in to all of Androids, and I think iOS have that now, right, too, with the lower fee for mobile. So again, just make sure you're taking that into consideration when you're about to compare these prototypes against each other. Now, once you've got the budget, you're going to times that by 1.65, divide it by the price you're looking to sell it at, and there's your unit sold target. Finally, before I move on to the next thing, I just want you to also take into consideration the instability of your game idea. That is, are you going to be able to post interesting screenshots and videos 3 to 7 times a week with enough variation that players will feel at a glance scrolling through your page that there's a lot of interesting things going on? She says after posting the 20th picture of a lighthouse this month. Point is that regular posting on the various social media channels can only have a good outcome for your game. You're going to attract publishers with that, game media, and if you don't have a marketing budget, or especially if you don't have a marketing budget, you need a social media campaign for your game. So make sure you factor in the marketability of your title, and I should probably ironically suggest that you don't pick a really common noun and verb as your game title if you want good search engine optimization. Yeah, turns out Steam Dredge, it's already a thing. So, some suggestions on ways you can weigh your prototype. The scope and budget. So you know roughly which of your prototypes are going to be longer or more tricky to develop than others, and roughly how much each are going to cost to make. You've got your playtest feedback, so you know which of the ideas captivated your audiences more and got them excited about what the full game could be. You have an understanding of the market placement. You know what is unique or better about your game compared to other titles, and you know what the market is satisfied with in terms of the amount of content they want for their money. You've thought about the marketability of your title, what avenues you might be able to go down to share that with your potential audience. And finally, please do take into consideration the quality of life on the project. So are you going to enjoy working on it for X amount of months or more likely years? What is going to be your role on it? Is that going to give you the level of development and growth that you're after in the time that you'll be working on it? If not, or if you'll be working for long stretches on things that you don't enjoy, are the mitigations that you can think of right now worth it? So are we actually going to be able to get this thing across the finish line and, still be happy, healthy people? That's the goal, right? Now, if that seems like a whole lot of mahi when you just want to get stuck in and make your game, I totally feel you. But if you're planning on hunting out a publisher, all this information is things that you can leverage in your discussions with them. So say in terms of when they ask you questions about your design decisions, you can talk about the play testing that you've done to kind of come up with that. It will also be things that the publishers just flat out expect to receive from you. So that in terms of your budget, your scope, and your roadmaps. So your team might come up with a scale system to weigh and judge the different prototypes like we did. You might let the producer decide. No? Okay. But in any case, if one of your prototype ideas is really shining in most, if not all of these categories, then that should probably be a green light for you. So Karpai. We've done a bunch of number crunching and market research. Surely we're into the fun stuff of actually building the game, right? And we are. We're just going to celebrate with a bit of a roadmap. So we're going to start with the important dates. Steam Next festivals, showcases like PAX, award shows. You want to map out where each of these things take place. Again, here we're trying to maximize the return on investment on the project and trying to make enough to bankroll the next project. Even if you're not particularly focused on how much of a return that you'll make, these are still really worth thinking about as you're planning your game project. Most of these kind of dates and awards show are geared towards creating a demo that includes the core components of your game, represents the visual look and feel of the final product, and really importantly, has the same level of the same kind of impact on your players that you're hoping the final product will have. It can be at a lower level, but for example, if you're kind of trying to create a high adrenaline game, then your playtesters should feel pumped after playing your demo. If it's if you're trying to scare your players, then that has to be involved in your demo as well. It doesn't have to be a complete representation, but it should be a good representation of what the idea that you're going to take through to fruition will be. Those post-its that we kind of used before to scope out our prototypes, we're going to bring them back and we're going to order them into groups. So we're going to look at, say if the demo is, say, a level or a couple of levels, what mechanics are you going to need from each of those levels? If it's a sinister fishing adventure, for just to take an example out of the ether, then you're going to need a boat, you'll need an inventory, fishing and boat equipment, fish. Actually, that would be good. You'll need the narrative system. You'll need quest items. You'll need a day and night cycle. You'll need monsters and a couple of other bits and pieces. And I know that seems like a lot, but it's actually missing out a whole bunch of what the final game will be, because things like additional zones, systems like upgrades or more ways to fish, special events, they can all wait till later on because they're built on top of these kind of core systems and not part of that just core loop. Now, this top row summarizes a whole lot of stuff, just because the slide was useless at the when I actually broke that down into all of its components. But yeah, hopefully you haven't you just haven't gone, 3 months and we'll do alpha, easy. Hopefully you have an idea of what those things actually mean to you. So when we say chapter 1 or chapter 2. We're going to take the post-its and order them into the order that we're going to tackle things in. So we're going to look at, say, saving and loading and localization, those kind of setup tasks really, really early on in the project. Think about what needs to come before you do other things. If it doesn't have dependencies, then what is the most risky pieces of work that you have to do for the demo, and make sure that those are earlier on in the process. Now, please don't fall into the trap of thinking that this kind of roadmap becomes some sort of holy text that you are beholden to and it can never change, because no, that it will absolutely change. So it's really just a guide to tell you how you're tracking against those important dates that you've set. If you kind of see, we're not going to, at this current rate, we're not going to hit that STEAM Next Festival date, then you can kind of do something, maybe you can do maybe you can do something about it the earlier you identify that you're not going to be hitting or reaching that demo for that date. Now, speaking of communication amongst the team and working out what we, how we work and what we can do, we're going to talk about ways of working. Now, game development and iterative development should be pretty synonymous, I feel, and indie development even more so. Anyone beyond their first game project will know that it's true, that what seems like a good idea in your head or on paper will absolutely not be the final game that is realized down the line. And that might be due to technical limitations, mechanics becoming boring after a while, or just good old-fashioned scope creep, or is that design evolution? Have we rebranded that? But that's why I said don't get too attached to that roadmap, because you'll constantly be changing and iterating it. Now, this is the Agile Manifesto, but if I were to rewrite it to suit what I have come to find works better for our context as a team, then instead it would look something like this. So, great team culture and communication over prescribed processes and tools, game development over following comprehensive documentation, player feedback over following the design, and embracing change over following the design. It's more specific to our context, but it still captures the spirit of the original manifesto. We don't want to spend days writing up GDDs and then even more over the course of the project, keeping that up to date when we change things. We've already got a backlog where we capture those things. We also need to get into the habit of going outside of the team for feedback. It's basically when you're too close to something, when you've invested, your time, your effort, blood, sweat, and tears, then it's impossible to be objective about it. And that's okay. In fact, you need to be in that headspace. But unfortunately, you probably also need access to a realistic point of view as well. So making sure you're routinifying, going outside of your team to test your game. So I hope this shows that Agile really suits the game development environment. But what about Scrum in particular? So Scrum is built for small teams that include all the necessary skill sets to get the work assigned to the team done. So your cross-functional team, basically. It's one of the more prescriptive of the Agile frameworks, and Scrum outlines 5 meetings within a containing event known as the sprint. And it's built to encourage and routinify that kind of inspect and adapt mentality and the reduction of waste and focus on the essential ideals. These meetings, though, take up about 10% of a 40-hour week. That's where people immediately get a bit concerned about Scrum. Because that works out to a month a year that you're in meetings and not actually kind of developing games. If you're not working on your games full time, so 40 hours a week, that can feel even more invasive. However, after watching teams for the last 10 years, I can say that those that have these regular sync-ups together, and especially if they have good facilitation and meeting focus, those teams ship faster. And that's exactly what we're targeting with this strategy here. Shared understanding and removal of barriers between team members provides coordinated focus, enables quality problem solving, and reduces team stress. It does feel clunky at first. It feels really clunky. But with practice and some facilitation, these meetings are a valuable use of time, not just for your team, but for your game. Don't also make the mistake of thinking that because you're mates with someone that your work styles are naturally going to gel. If you haven't worked with someone before, have a sit down at the beginning of the project and come up with some ideas on how you want to work together to track progress and get things done, basically. So are you going to track work in something like Jira or Trello, or will you use a spreadsheet or a physical task board? How should your builds be handled? Should they be versioned? If you don't have a person dedicated to QA on your team, how will you test the product? Should there be a build made at the end of each piece of work so it can be tested? Basically, there's lots of different styles of working. Most of the time, people don't care which way they go, or one person will care deeply and the others are pretty much happy to go with that. But once you've started down a process and separate processes, there's a lot more barriers to aligning again. So if you can decide all those things at the start, things are going to run a lot more smoother. Also, though, make sure you're setting up so if any of those processes that you're deciding or ways of working you're deciding don't work for any of the members of the team, that you can change them. They're not set in stone. So back to the problems with Scrum. The next area that turns off a lot of game developers is the all in the sprint mentality. It kind of elevates one area of the development team over the other. So for example, if your sprint goal was to get the production UI in, you're kind of ignoring the design and art component that has probably come before. I agree, throw out the sprint goal for game development, but make sure your team has a shared understanding of what the product, the game is going to look like at the end of the sprint. And that's really important for when you've got milestones coming up like showcases. The thing I like about Scrum is that it has a lot of rules because you're supposed to throw out the ones that don't work for your context or the prescriptions that you've outgrown as a team. Following the rules of Scrum is a lot less valuable than following the spirit in which those rules were suggested. Now, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to smash through some of the particular Scrum meetings that I think are really important for every team. And if you're not doing all of Scrum, try and work these processes in some way. And the first one is the Backlog Refinement meeting, previously known as the Product Grooming Session. I don't know why they rebranded that. But yeah, the Backlog Refinement is the only meeting of the 5 where the focus isn't in terms of what's in the current sprint, it's on what's ahead. It's a technical design meeting, so not a design meeting as we as game developers think of design. Rather, it's the ambulance at the top of the cliff versus, the gate at the top of the cliff versus the ambulance at the bottom. So we're trying to identify, how are we going to test this thing? Do we need debug commands? Where am I? Basically, how are you going to know that this piece of work is done to the standard that you as a team want it to be done? We spend about an hour a week in product refinement, although expect to spend more at the start of the project than the end. And then we also spend another 1 to 2 hours a week in design meetings, as well as the impromptu chats that happen throughout the day. Daily stand-up, so the time that you coordinate with each of your team members. Obviously, a lot of smaller studios are just kind of living in each other's laps, so it's really hard to see how this could be valuable or necessary. But I think it affords a couple of benefits to us. Firstly, it's a good time to raise things that aren't urgent enough to interrupt people with throughout the day, but still need a resolution. And then just to coordinate your day. So does someone else on the team need a build by X time, or do you need some of Y's time today? Has someone encountered problems with a piece of work and the team need to come together and have a design powwow over it? Doing your stand-up around the task board also keeps the team on track and accountable to each other, which also helps strengthens your team culture. We spend about 5 to 15 minutes a day for our stand-up. Now, if your team is dispersed or not working regular hours or not working those hours together, then a good rule of thumb is to have a stand-up room in your Slack or Discord. And that's where you can just at the start of each year a day, come in and write in what your plan for the day is. And so when the next person comes in, they can read that and coordinate their day if they need to do anything for the team. Finally, the sprint retrospective. Having a set time at the end of each sprint where you can reflect on what has gone well and what felt like it could have gone better is a really valuable exercise. Although if you're looking at this more as like a rant fest, then you might have the kind of wrong idea. The goal of the meeting is to determine a couple of changes that the team can make next time in order to improve the process of developing the project together. The changes may or may not work, but you'll review that at the next retrospective. We spend about 30 minutes every 2 weeks for our retrospective, although you probably should allow an hour in case there's more discussion. There is the old script of what went well, what didn't go well, but after a while, after a few weeks of doing that kind of same thing, it starts to get old. So do try and, kind of put the, change the topics around a bit. So at the moment, the topic of our retro is what is worrying me the most. That means that we can work on a maximum of 3 actions per sprint, and it also has the added benefit of reducing team stress, which is great. Now, we're almost there, but one last thing I hope to get in, and that is audience building. I mentioned earlier that the whole strategy that I'm talking about assumes that we're not going to get wildly lucky and instead hopes for the best in bringing on a fantastic publishing partner and prepares for the worst, self-publishing with a tiny, if any, marketing budget. Now, we were contacted by our first publishing scout 2 weeks into the development of Dredge. And by the time we had our publish a demo milestone, we had been contacted by others and still more following us on social media. Discussing your games with these scouts can provide you with really good insight about the types of partners and games they're specifically looking for, general market advice and info as well, and just, feedback on whether your game is any good. Not all scouts will be as generous with their time, but there are scouts that are. Now, there are fantastic pitching talks that have been today and there are tomorrow, so I'm not going to go into that. I also don't have any time, but the idea hopefully being that at least sort of a couple of months after you start sending out your demo, you're going to be pretty confident on whether you're self-publishing or signing with a partner. Now, this is the last thing I really think everyone should think about, and that is your coming soon page and your wish lists. Again, we're using Steam as an example because we can actually get data out of the system there. So we already know that your day one sales is critical on Steam. And the way that you get Steam to help you boost that is from your follow account. The current thinking is, depending on what else is launching that day, hopefully you're not going up against a big AAA title, sort of 1,000 to 5,000 followers is going to get you featured on your launch. And those features have a really big impact to your bottom line. Now, if you just rushed out and bought a whole lot of wish lists for your game, that's definitely a strategy of some description, but it will make the next step pretty much impossible, and that's trying to gauge what your sales are going to be based on your number of wish lists. So about half of your wish lists will convert into sales in the first year. And that's usually when discounted. So we're going to take the number of units that we already worked out that we needed to sell, and we're going to, where am I up to? And we're going to times that by 2.5 to get roughly the amount of wish lists that we're going to need in our first year to convert into the level of sales that we're going to want. If you're targeting sales off over 200,000, like we are there, if you're selling it at about $18 a pop, you're gonna want to be aiming for about 57,000 wish lists over the course of your first year, and a good chunk of those earlier on in the piece. Yes, cool. Okay, no, just checking how much I have left to go. So now a good indie game on Steam only earns about 20 wish lists a day, or the better part of 8 years to build up your pre-launch kind of wish list target if you are only relying on those organic wish lists. You're going to need to showcase your game via social media, influencers, reviewers, all of those good things to try and bring more attention to your game. But the other point I want to make here is the earlier you get your Steam page up, the more wish lists you're going to accumulate before your launch. It can be really not nice thinking about putting, kind of in progress work up there, but it will be worth it in the long run. And you can constantly update your Steam page as you get more art in, or kind of finalized pieces, so it can evolve as you're progressing your production as well. Now, basically, you just need to take every opportunity you can to tell players about your game and make decisions in a way that's going to stack the odds in the favor of your game as much as possible. So, ngā mihi nui, there are a lot of resources that I found really helpful that I've put up on blacksaltgames.com/NZGDC21. So feel free to jump on and look into those. If you're interested in how this process, or what sort of game this kind of process creates, then hopefully you'll be coming along to the Indie Biz Showcase tonight from now in the Oceania room. And there I hope you'll have time to check out our demo dredge and see what you think. Yes. don't think we have time for questions. I'm so sorry. No questions. Sorry, guys.